Terrific. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for inviting me to moderate this session today. First of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm zooming in from the Wurundjeri lands in Melbourne, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners of those lands that were never ceded. I'd also like to just quickly acknowledge the eminent historian Stuart McIntyre, who died, I think, yesterday. He's a former president of the Academy of Social Sciences of Australia. Just for people here who might be interested, we are working to produce an obituary of Stuart McIntyre for the conversation, which will be up very soon. And obviously, he's a very important, contributor in that area. What we're going to do today with this panel discussion is really work across the whole panel with a bit of general discussion on the key themes of the representation and status of social sciences in broader public discourse. So what I'm going to do is start by introducing all of our panelists and then try to direct some questions to individual panelists, and then we'll sort of move into a general discussion. So for today's panel, we have Dr. Emma Campbell. Dr. Campbell is CEO of the ACT Council of Social Service and former CEO of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia. We've got Emeritus Professor Rosalind Croucher, who has been a past president of the Human Rights Commission, current president of the Human Rights Commission since July 2017, and is an Emeritus Professor at Macquarie University. Alison Pennington, who is a senior economist at the Centre for Future Work at the Australia Institute. We have Professor Debble Terry, who is here. Debble Terry is Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Queensland and a Fellow and former President of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia. We've got Professor Maggie Walter. Maggie Walter is Palawa and Professor Emerita of Sociology at the University of Tasmania. In May 2021, she commenced as Commissioner with the Victorian Uruk Justice Commission. And we have Professor Dan Woodman. Dan is the T.R. Ashworth Professor in Sociology at the University of Melbourne and President of the Council for the Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. He is founder and organising committee chair of the Social Sciences Week Australia. Now, just to kick this off, I think the question we've sort of been asked to look at today is, what is the perception of the status of social sciences? And maybe to start with, we'll start with a question to Maggie Walter. I'm interested in, what is your sense of the status of social sciences, and does it differ between different groups in our community? And are there particular areas where, it is stronger or less strong, and there are issues that we need to think about?
Yeah, so I'm here on Wurundjeri country. So, and I'm going to apologise in advance because I'm going to be quite frank in my comments. And the reason for that is that it's got only a couple of minutes and we need to get messages across. So social sciences for Indigenous peoples, Indigenous academics indeed, are on the nose. And the reason for that is, and I frequently get asked by people, why would you bother? That there is almost no engagement among the social sciences with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I pay my respects here to Chris Hatley and the Indigenous section in the Social Sciences report, but that unfortunately is an aberration rather than the norm. And I worry that, if Chris, as time comes, then we go back to the status quo, where it feels like, as a sociologist in Australia, that we are operating, I may as well be working at the University of Surrey, and we are not living in a nation state that was founded on colonisation. So when I'm in my many years of teaching within the University of Tasmania, up until about 10 years ago, we used the British text as if we could teach race, talking about the sort of, the Brixton riots. That's changed now, but even if you look at the Australian text, you've got Indigenous stuff as in one chapter, maybe half a chapter, along with the other migrants and others. And, as a sociologist, I constantly come back to say, well, Mill's questions about the sociological imagination asks us as social scientists to ask certain questions about our society. So what's the structure of this particular society as a whole? where does this society stand in human history, and what varieties of men and women now prevail. And Mills asked us especially to find the link between biography and history. And I would suggest that in Australian social sciences, we are not doing any of those things. And when we ask those questions, we're not asking them from an Australian perspective, because if we were, we would be asking them from what our society actually is. We're not just Britain with better weather. This is a very distinct society that's built on colonisation. And I'm not using the word colonisation as a pejorative there. I'm more using it to say that this is the reality, rather than saying it's necessarily, well, there's got a few bad things associated with it. So I guess my plea, if we want to make the social sciences more relevant, is to actually have a social sciences that are based in Australian society as it is, as we are. What is our links between biography and history when we're looking at groups or individuals or society, and what is our place in human history, and what is the structure of this particular society as a whole. And then perhaps I think we might have a much more meaningful social sciences. So thanks, Misha.
That's a terrific and provocative way to start off. I just wonder if any other panelists would like to jump in on that question and really address what Maggie said. In particular, I just wonder whether the lack that you've identified is as comprehensive, perhaps, as you put it. I mean, are there areas in which some of this work is happening, or is it really fundamentally absent? Can anybody talk to that question? Yep. Okay, so Rosalind Croucher.
Just a quick response, and thank you very much, Maggie, for your invocation for a better engagement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in social science work, and for the social sciences to embrace the issues regarding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I just thought I would share an example of an application in response to your call, Maggie. It's the work of my colleague, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, June Oscar AO, who completed a year ago a report called Wiyani Udangani, Women's Voices, in which was the culmination of consultations using grounded theory and guided by the IATSIS approach to consultation, their ethical guide on consultations with Indigenous people, nearly 3,000 women and girls across the country. So it might be an isolated example, I hope not, but it is a solid example from the perspective of the contribution of the Human Rights Commission, indeed led by the Social Justice Commissioner. I know that Commissioner Oscar was hoping for a continuation of the support for that work to the next stages, but at the moment that's still on the wish list and has not been confirmed. But it's an important contribution in the space of Indigenous women and girls. So just an observation, and thank you for raising that, Maggie.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that? Debble Terry?
Misha, thank you, and good afternoon to lots of people, but good morning here in Brisbane, and obviously I'm joining you from Turrbal and Jagera land here in Brisbane. I just did want to say at the outset, thank you for organising this roundtable, and extraordinarily sad news about Professor Stuart McIntyre, who was really one of the giants in our field. And if I look to my left, I look at my bookcase, and Stuart's book, The Poor Relation, is always there, and one that I often refer to. So I think just taking the time to acknowledge Stuart today is very appropriate. I really appreciated your comments, Maggie, and it was good to commence that session. And I was very pleased when I picked up the State of the 2021 Social Sciences, and I commend that work to everybody, to see genuine reconciliation as the number one priority. And I absolutely support that. And I agree that decolonising and indigenising the social sciences is a challenge for all of us. It will require concerted effort, from my perspective, to promote research projects, paradigms, governance frameworks that are inclusive of and are led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and which promote obviously the interests of Australia's Aboriginal peoples. But for me, and have the great privilege of working with Bronwyn Fredericks here as our Pro Vice Chancellor, it needs to be absolutely led by our Indigenous colleagues. It will require true partnerships, and what we've done here at UQ, just to provide an example to this discussion, we recently launched our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research and innovation strategy, a really important step forward, and it really does set a course for our university to pursue ethical and responsible research that really, I think, does contribute and will contribute to some of the issues you've raised, Maggie, but there is much more that we need to do. Obviously, I've talked about leadership and genuine decision-making responsibility, but we're also very conscious of supporting more of our Indigenous PhD students, our early career researchers, our mid-career researchers. We've got to build this research pipeline. It's absolutely critical if we are going to go anywhere towards addressing the challenge that you put out to all of us, Maggie, and I do thank you for doing that.
Excellent. Okay. I'd like to broaden out the discussion a bit, but while keeping in mind and continuing to discuss the issues that Maggie's raised. In preparing for this session, I actually read an article written by Ross Gittins a few years ago, where he was talking about the role of social sciences and explaining to the general public what social sciences are. And basically the way he characterised it was he sort of said that social sciences are almost like in a battle with STEM, and that STEM appears to be winning. And if you think about the government's, was it called Job Ready graduate package from last year, where the cost of studying humanities and social science subjects increased in relation to, to STEM subjects, it does look like that battle to some extent is being lost by the social sciences. So while keeping in mind, I think that there's very important work to do in terms of renovating what the social sciences are looking at, thinking about Indigenous perspectives, thinking about reconciliation. Maybe I'll throw to Dan just to start with this question, but do you think that social sciences are losing traction in the public sphere, and what can be done about it?
I think that piece from Ross Gittins was actually for Social Sciences Week in our inaugural event a few years ago. So I'm not going to talk about Social Sciences Week too much, but go Google it if you haven't heard of it. I hope you have. And Social Sciences Week is something that I do with a bunch of different organisations and associations around Australia, but with a lot of help from the Academy team, Chris and Bonnie and Sue and Anna really make it hum. So I'll take a cheeky moment to thank them and the Academy for that support. But he wrote that article when we were launching Social Sciences Week, which was, I guess, trying to do two things, which was to give people a little bit of a sense that all these things that we do together do come under a banner of social sciences. I think people are aware that sciences are many things, but also have a sense of the natural sciences as a thing. And also that they can like or dislike something that a natural scientist says without saying that science as a whole is undervalued. So I wanted to do two things with Social Sciences Week, which was build our sense of being a community by getting people who are running events showcasing publicly what social sciences do together to run it at the same time, not necessarily more work, but do it together. So a kind of sector building thing, which is one of the things the Academy talks about in its wonderful new report, but also to kind of showcase the benefits of what we do. It's that there's lots of different things under social sciences, and almost everyone, even the people who push through Jobs Ready graduate bill or even poo-poo the arts faculties at universities, usually like some kind of social science. They read something in the paper and they like it and agree with it. So it's giving people a sense of all that this covers and that it's not just one thing. In some ways, the challenge for the natural sciences is that, as we've been hit by this pandemic, I've been going back to read Ulrich Beck, who was my favourite companion through my PhD, talking about the risk society and the contest of expertise. And we've got these wonderful paradoxes that social sciences can work through. On the one hand, expertise has never been more recognised, and on the other hand, those culture wars clashes around expertises have never been as sharp as they are now. And in some ways, as social scientists, we're better prepared than the natural scientists to recognise that we don't just give one answer. You know, sometimes the natural sciences get trapped into, when they start to do public engagement, into talking like the data says this is what we must do. Social scientists have never been able to get away with that either among our own colleagues or out in the world. So we are really facing those things sharply. But in some ways, we're as prepared, if not better prepared, than the natural sciences within our disciplines and what we give to respond to that. It's just how we do it. Getting better at doing it together when we need to, and speaking with one voice when we need to, and also, highlighting all the different approaches we bring when we need to. That's the challenge, I think.
Okay. So I might, on that point, throw to Alison Pennington, because Alison, you're a public communicator to a large extent. Do you think that there are things that people in the social sciences aren't doing that they could to lift the profile of social sciences in public discourse? Do you think that it's sort of respected and adequately seen as an important contributor to the public discussion?
No, I mean, the status of social sciences has taken a nosedive, I think, especially under in the post-GFC period. Just want to check, am I audible enough? Because my headphones are a bit crap. Yeah. So, I mean, I want to try and link in the response that touches on what's been discussed, because, I mean, the STEM agenda is actually, it's a weapon. It's been used to attack social sciences, and we should be upfront about that. The social sciences is the study of social relationships. As an economist, I'm very proud to say that economics is a social science, and I can and I have to exist in technical fields and in technical realms, but make the case for illuminating the relationships between people as it relates to production, who gets what, who makes what, what do we do with the products that we produce and services we produce. So in the last few years, there has been this big push around STEM, as though it were better suited to the jobs that were available. And a lot of what the myth dispelling I do around this, as a way to also highlight the importance of social sciences, is to say that look at what's been happening to the job market and graduate job outcomes. Maths and sciences graduates actually have some of the worst full-time job outcomes. And social sciences graduates have, on the whole, better ones. They tend to study more, but it's about pointing to the failure in an economic sense of the government and private investment to create enough jobs. What's going on is they're trying to mask the reality that there are not sufficient jobs and opportunities for people, regardless of their skill sets. We have many people with STEM-related qualifications that languish in unemployment, and we have lots of people with social sciences qualifications who languish in unemployment. So it's if we think about the employability agenda, the job-ready graduates story, it absolutely has to link into this in terms of what people in the social sciences can do to lift the status. I mean, the elephant in the room, of which I have almost no opportunities to discuss, and I'm going to take it at this time, is the 1980s postmodern turn, because that absolutely rip-roared through the social sciences. I was someone who had to defend sociology against every suddenly class and broader structural concepts of inequality were somehow old. Globalization and the cyberspace world was going to make structural identifiers like helping us to explain inequality suddenly irrelevant. We didn't need them anymore. We needed multiple identities, often conflicting identities. And I think this has been eroding the status of social sciences, because at the same time as this has happened, we've had a massive campaign to redistribute wealth from everyday working people up to the most wealthiest people. So as unions were being dismantled, as the labour share of national income was declining consistently over decades, we had this other parallel story that was coming out of the social sciences, that ways of understanding inequality in that world were not relevant to us anymore. right? We could find ourselves in all these other individual identities in new ways. We've made a lot of gains, I think, in this time in terms of elevating the social claims of certain groups within a class, but we've lost so much. And I think if we're going to stop this increasing rise of far-right populism, which I think will continue to grow, not as big in the US as it will here, but it will continue to grow until the social sciences can, again, reinstate its claims and it's what the light that it can shed on growing inequality, growing structural inequality. And that's everything to do about wealth and jobs and incomes and the ability of people to make ends meet. So I'll leave it there.
So that's interesting, because it sounds like you're arguing perhaps for more a class-based way of thinking about economics than an identity politics model. And one of the things that I've been dealing with a little bit is people have been arguing in economics about, for example, the significance of having more female economists because of the role that they will play in thinking about questions differently, framing the narrative differently, and there's still a lot of work to do in that area. Just going back to the point that Maggie made to kick us off, surely we do need some of this identity politics to think about, for example, having more Indigenous economists thinking about questions differently, framing the debate differently. Are you arguing that that we should abandon sort of that identity way of thinking about these things, or are you saying that the two things can operate concurrently?
No, I mean, I would say I'm a creature of the social sciences, and that my undergraduate studies are in gender studies and, you know, post-colonial studies. And what was missing was always a framework to actually bring about change to the what is the inequalities that you identify. And I think it's the failure to provide that endpoint. As I said in the previous contribution, we have gained so much in this time of being able to focus more emphasis and light on inequalities in between people. I would say, you know, a lot of the gains are being made around sexuality, gender identities. I think there's a lot of progress there, which has been fortified in the civil rights, you know, the equal marriage rights campaign. But I would maybe contest that on the particular issue of Aboriginal rights and the profound economic and social inequalities that continue to persist. Have we made much more progress in the last few decades than we did in the self-determination, you know, sovereignty period of mass mobilizations, where there was a strong class politic and it was interwoven and emboldened the Aboriginal rights movement, which actually helped to expand economic claims to land, to higher income support payments, to better jobs, to control over job creation programs, which of course we know that the LNP government pulled those programs apart.
Misha, can I just jump in here, Misha?
Maggie, respond, yeah.
I would take you to task about calling Indigenous issues identity politics. And I don't think Alison and I are at cross purposes at all, because if we look at the key social forces of race, class and gender, that's where I think we're both coming from here. It's the identity politics is a whole different thing. If you're poor and Aboriginal and dying in custody, it's not your identity that's the issue there. It's basic inequalities, and they are based again around class, gender and race.
Great. So we'll bring in Emma on that.
I just want to begin firstly by agreeing with Professor Walter about the total lack of engagement, or the shortage of engagement with Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander communities, also with people of migrant and refugee background. But I think perhaps the question is much social sciences in academia failing versus social sciences in the world that I work in, which is advocacy, because social sciences in the world of advocacy is alive and well. It's our lifeblood. It's how we make our arguments. It's how we challenge structures and authority. And I would suggest that the challenge against social sciences versus STEM demonstrates the power of social sciences. I mean, really, it's we know that the best evidence of something having an effect is when institutions and power structures try to ban or control or restrict the power of or access to that thing. And that's what's happening with social sciences around the increasing in costs and the denigration of social sciences. And I think that's because, certainly in what I do in advocacy, the power of social science is its capacity to provide language, structures, means of communicating the experiences of those who've been oppressed, sidelined, or disadvantaged. And it also provides the framework through which we can offer solutions. So in my world, the theories and the power of social science is alive and well. And I hear that also in some of the comments that Alison's making. I mean, we see it all the time, that through history that tells us of stories of colonization and racial injustice. That comes from history, the study of history. Through political science and law, that's helped us develop ideas of human rights that I use every day in my advocacy, of legislative protections, what democratic institutions should be performing, how democratic institutions should be performing. And it provides a framework for the interaction of all these ideas. And the reason that people who face disadvantage cannot explain, or sorry, they find it difficult to persuade, to explain or exert the necessary influence to improve their circumstances in the face of power for many reasons. But social sciences gives us the power to challenge some of the structures that have created those inequalities and injustices.
Thanks. So I think that raises an interesting question, which, I'm happy for anyone on the panel to jump in and answer, but it really is, to what extent should social scientists be advocates? And I guess I'm asking that with sort of two lenses, one of which is that traditionally in academia, there's sort of an uneasiness with this idea of advocacy in academia. Some people are more comfortable with it than others. But the second is, to what extent can social scientists, through meaningful advocacy, both raise the profile of social sciences and achieve socially just outcomes, or better outcomes? Does anybody have any thoughts on the role of social scientists as public advocates? Yes, Rosalind? Yeah.
Thank you. Just finding the unmute button. Just one observation and flowing from Emma's enthusiasm, which I embrace and respond to well. And it's the importance of social science research in the work that I've been involved in. And that's really since 2007, first for 10 years in law reform and now at the Human Rights Commission. The key law and policy work that I've been involved in is nothing without the social sciences, because no policy reform enters into any serious discussion without the evidence to back it up. So it is strongly there in the key work that I've been involved in. And in terms of the advocacy question, and I do carry an academic background with me, and I've had engagement with a number of universities in terms of the value of contributing in the law reform or policy reform space, being advocates in your own cause. So in this particular audience, in terms of social scientists, sometimes it's not waiting for the issues to come to you. It's you identifying where the work that you do can make a really positive contribution to the work of others, like a Human Rights Commission, like a Law Reform Commission, the bodies that are involved actively in significant inquiries in relation to topics of the moment, and being advocates for your work in the context of those inquiries or parliamentary inquiries. I know there is a separate issue in the academic context of of getting that kind of contribution recognised, which is a conversation I'm very glad that I'm away from for 14 years. It troubles me greatly how the valuing of academic work, the goalposts keep shifting all the time, and there's not a true appreciation of the contribution of people working in the humanities and the social sciences, in which I include my own discipline of law. It does trouble me, but there is an opportunity for advocacy of people's own work in the context of participating in major policy reform inquiries by Parliament, by bodies like the Human Rights Commission, like the Law Reform Commission. So it's just, there is a space for advocacy, and it's a responsibility of people like deans and research DVCs and others to value that work and to emphasise how that can be recognised within the various academic contexts. But from my perspective, it's extraordinarily invaluable. It's the golden thread of providing the evidence base to any solid policy reform work.
I'm just wondering whether anybody else does see any dangers with advocacy. I mean, I sort of do wonder about the extent to which things like the Job Ready graduate strategy is based on an antipathy born of the perception that academics, social scientists are perhaps too much involved in advocacy, and it's actually created a challenge to some extent.
The balance of the social scientists, sociology, my own discipline, is social change. The discipline was born out of the need to predict and learn about social change, and since right through up until probably with Alison's modernism, etc., the idea was that was the purpose of doing social science and sociology, was to try and create the evidence to create a better social world. And I personally can't think of why you would be a social scientist if that wasn't your goal. The sociology or the social life of teapots, is useless to everybody. We really should be doing things that are important and are important in our society. And yes, that will make us targets. That comes with the territory. But we have to be willing to defend our position and to be such good researchers that the evidence is very strong in making the points that we do. We have to be brave.
Can I jump in, Misha? I don't
think there's enough.
Terry was going to say something, and then Dan, and then I think Emma was next.
Right.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. Thanks, Misha, and a great conversation. I just think I'd like to just take it to a higher level, because I think it is about how we, and this comes through in the State of the Social Sciences report, how we demonstrate value. So I don't think it is pitting the natural sciences, engineering, tech against the social sciences. We've just lived through a pandemic where we know science and health advice has been absolutely critical, but we know that the challenge of opening up borders will be changing behaviour, changing attitudes towards vaccinations, that we are absolutely critical in, if we just take that example. If we go to the broader issues that we're dealing with, the strength of our civil society, the strength of democracy, how we deal with climate change, that's about how we change people's attitudes and understanding, how we look at what the future of work is. There are a myriad of questions that we will not be able to answer as a society without strong, vocal social scientists where we are part of the solution and we are committed to demonstrating our value and to being involved in those discussions. And I think that is the challenge for all of us, is to how do we really play our critical role, because we've got a responsibility to play that role. We will not address these issues as a society, as I say, without good, strong social science, evidence-based, all of the themes we've heard around this table. We've got to be in those discussions. And that's why, I was delighted to see this report. I loved, I think it's on page, one of the pages, grand challenges for social science. these are grand challenges for us as much as they are for all disciplines, and our challenge is to be involved in the solutions.
Just one quick follow-up on that before we get to Dan. I think one of the things that was sort of mentioned is that if you're involved in that public discussion, sometimes there will be a backlash, there will be a negative response. Do we do enough to equip academics to support them to engage with that public discourse? I'm sort of asking that question in light of some work I've been doing with the Australian Science Media Centre around sort of the trolling of academics and the way that they're treated when they engage in that public discussion. Do you have any thoughts on that, Deborah?
I mean, I think it's a really good point, Misha. I think a lot of your work has certainly contributed to having far more of our academics, you know, in the conversation, but also then being picked up by other media outlets. And I think that's been really important. I do think institutions need to be providing more of that support, but also reiterating, you know, the core of what we do is advancing knowledge. And to advance knowledge, we need to have academic freedom, we need to have freedom of expression, and we need to support those central tenets of our institutions. But I think also, as you say, support our academics and our researchers to be involved in the debates, to be able to deal, as you say, with you know, some of the very difficult situations they might find themselves in. And we've got responsibilities in the different roles we have to ensure that debate on our campuses is respectful. But that debate is how we will deal with the big challenges ahead of us.
Great, thanks. Dan?
Well, partly building on that, I guess I wanted to just be cautious about, or not cautious, but recognise that some of the things we identify as problems may not be as big problems as we think they are from my perspective. And it's more about how we recognise our successes as much as the problems with social science. As Rosalind and Emma, I think, was saying, there's so many social scientists working in the world. Like, as Alison was saying, our employment rates for our graduates are as good as many of the natural sciences. The skills are valued and being used all the time. You know, sometimes we think that we don't have particular policy cut through as an individual social scientist, but natural scientists feel exactly the same way. And your average social scientist is going to end up on the radio and talking to journalists and other things because of the topics we cover, much, much more than your average scientist in most fields, maybe not epidemiology in the last couple of years, but otherwise we really undersell our impact. And I think one of the things is that even those who are kind of bringing through jobs ready graduate and other things, as I said, they're talking to their own social scientists. They'll be saying cut funding for social sciences in university one day, the next day they're going to be meeting with someone to talk about what's happening with regional job markets or young people in their electorate or something like that. So one of the things I think that helps is to recognise that there's a great diversity in the social sciences, strengths and some things we might consider weaknesses. And I think in some ways, one of the things that's been our strength is we recognise we can't step outside politics and advocacy, but we can be reflexive and not say that every part of social science is advocacy or activism. It's related and you can't escape it, but it doesn't mean that every piece of work is advocacy, and it doesn't mean that there's ever going to be one utopia or one position that we can put forward and know that that's the only answer to the problem. As social scientists, you know, you're not going to get away with that at all. So I think it's doing the work to make sure the public knows that there's all these kinds of social sciences that take different perspectives and give you different things of value. And maybe the government will say they don't like something some social scientists are saying, or even you don't. But that doesn't mean that there's not people learning all these skills about concepts for how the world works, how we might live together better, what the future might look like different to it is now. That's really valuable for your kids as they go into the world of work. And you might not like all those discussions, but you're not going to be able to avoid them. So we may as well have them better, with better data and better concepts that help us map the terrain of difference and debate. You know, I don't want to be utopian myself that will solve our problems, but we're doing really great work. And sometimes I think we take on some of the messages from outside about us, instead of, like the natural sciences, you know, knowing when the time is to say, we're great, you might not agree with everything we say, but here's our collective, we're speaking with one voice about our strengths. You know, that's one of the things I've tried to do with my organisation I'm part of now, called the Council for the Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, is bringing our industry and policy friends to talk for us a little bit more. Like, the natural sciences are quite good at doing this. They have those collective of allies when they're challenged in a way that we don't always mobilise as effectively. So I think it's as much about making our cases as any problems with how we do it. Do the work.
Now, Emma's had to turn off her camera because she's got some bad internet, but hopefully is able to talk now. You there, Emma?
I think so. Yeah, I think I should be okay to speak if I have my video off. But we in the advocacy community, we need more advocacy from academics. In this, we have so many intractable problems in our communities, be it the housing crisis that we're currently facing, growing inequality, issues around over-incarceration of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people. We need academics to use their research and their deep knowledge and understanding of the challenges in our community to help us challenge government and shape policy and change policy so that we can manage. And I think when we see good quality research coming out of universities, we're so excited by it. We use it all of the time. And I think academics in the social sciences should know that the power of their research, when it's used by academics, used by advocates, can really bring about significant change. And so we need more of it, not less.
Just one other quick follow-up I was thinking about was just again on this question of advocacy for Maggie Walter. Are there any particular issues that Indigenous social scientists face in their public advocacy and their work in the public realm? And is there anything particular that needs to be done to help facilitate that work and to support them?
Look, thanks for that question, Misha. Yes, there are. So what happens is that we tend to be very few of us, so there tends to be sort of one in the whole school or a whole faculty. But when we go out, we're seen as Aboriginal first and scholars second. So there's sort of a dismissing of our scholarship, a dismissing of our capacity as scholars, and we're seen as Aboriginal activists rather than scholarly researchers. And that really makes a problem when people just presume. You have to remind people that you do have a PhD, that you are actually a mainstream distinguished professor, as if somehow being Aboriginal and being these other things are not compatible. You have to be one or the other. So what I would ask from my social scientist colleagues is that you actually cite us for a start. It's amazing how many scholarly publications do not cite Aboriginal scholars in this field. That somehow that sort of even the items about Aboriginal stuff has got mostly non-Indigenous citations in it. So it's about bringing us in as scholars and recognising our scholarship as well as our voice to speak on particular issues.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything else they wanted to jump in with at the moment? Just to give a moment for anybody to pick up any stray thoughts they haven't had a chance to weigh in on.
I can add in some more thoughts. I had this thought actually when we first kicked off and Maggie was speaking about the role of social sciences in helping us to understand what Australia is and what happened here and what it is that we have done, where it is that we're going, what can we become. I think that it's something that when I was working my way through my studies, my postgraduate studies, I was so hungry for Australian specific knowledge, theories, understanding, history, because, as a colonial nation, so much of this has been swept under the rug. And we all know very well the state of education, in the mainstream education system, about how much is told, how much the average Australian understands and knows about what it is, how young this colony is really. So I've been thinking quite a lot about the relationship between the attacks on the social sciences and the decline of the ability of us to understand who we are with what's happening in the economy. And I think there are a lot of parallels, and I would say it's not a coincidence that, for instance, one of the hardest hit sectors in the COVID pandemic is the arts sector. And artists have been thrown on the scrap heap. And what do artists do? They are lenses to the world. They look, they absorb information, and they create products and ideas and thoughts about and emotions about what it is that they're seeing and understanding. And so that's an example of a very place-based experience. And I think Australia, especially during the COVID pandemic, if we look more broadly in an economic sense, which does matter to all people living here, is that we've become more and more dependent on fossil fuel extraction. And we've kind of reverted back to kind of our colonial role in the broader empire, which was to dig out stuff out the ground and export it off to wealthier, foreign owners of that wealth. So maybe it's like a deeper sort of philosophical question about who we are as Australia and what social sciences help us to do to understand who we are. I'm a creature of Australian political economy, and I do a lot of work now in industrial relations and labour markets. There is no way that you can understand what goes on in Australia and how people think about work, how they experience work, and how they experience Australia, unless you really delve deep into the specific history of, conciliation, arbitration, the early rise of unionism, like the roots of Chartism, which came to here in boats as convicts, and Australia as a colonial project and as a sovereign, national independent country, is intimately tied to the study of the social sciences. For me, it's no surprise that we are reverting back into a less independent place, increasingly dependent on bigger powers, and that social sciences is being eroded, and we are less able to see the social relations around us, less able to understand who we are in that process.
Just one quick question that made me think about, which is the role of social scientists in terms of advocating for social science as a discipline, like advocating for this particular body of work, and actually then the specific work that you are all doing as individual academics and experts. Do you think that there is, does anybody on the panel have any thoughts on the extent to which social sciences as a sphere of operation are representing their interests in the broader political discourse, like how that's actually going? No, that looks like maybe a tricky question. Just while you're pondering that for a second, just to mention that there's been some really terrific comments in the chat. I'm always very interested in comments because it's very hard to get good comments and curate them well. And there's lots of very thoughtful and insightful comments in the chat if anybody wants to have a read of that. Does anybody have any, because we're going to have to wrap up in a minute anyway, does anybody have any last minute comments or thoughts or things that they wanted to say?
Misha, can I respond to that question about, I guess, politics? There was a Parliamentary Friends of Social Sciences group that some of us started this term. And again, the Academy's been a big supporter of that. And that was really helpful to have that group, but I was also very naive about the workings of such groups, and whose former staff and now lobbyists sends, a request to launch a report, and these kind of things is how the group functions. But they're cross-party, and they do put their name in, put a line in the sand and say, we support the social sciences. But then some of them, after saying nice things, will also trade their vote in the Jobs Ready graduate bill at the last moment for something else. One of the things I think is sometimes our expectations are too high. As experts and social scientists, we're going to have a role that will sometimes be subordinate to advocates and to activists and to politics and democracy. We put things out there and we do our best to help people have better concepts, data, and a sense of what the real divisions are, but we can't kind of change all these things. And in some ways, I think we're more aware of that than the natural sciences are. But what they're quite good at is, you know, having business, a technology sector that speaks up for them. You know, we have all these graduates doing this great work, but the employers didn't really step up when the cuts were coming. But it's not a sense of crisis. Remember, there's still a huge number of students taking social science courses. And if anything, it's going to grow. What Jobs Ready graduates might do is change the class makeup, to use that word, of who's accessing which subjects and why. But there's so much social science that's being done all over Australia in every sector. And just making sure we highlight that, and then we get our friends to make the point too, is how we're going to be able to next time stop the next iteration of Jobs Ready graduate. And, you know, I hate to say it, but also changes of government sometimes help as well. So
okay. We're going to have to wrap up there because I know we're already 2 minutes over time and I'll be in trouble. I'd just like to thank the Academy for Social Sciences for organising this. I'd like to thank all the panellists. That was a terrific discussion. I really appreciate all your contributions. It was an incredibly eminent panel. So thank you very much for your time. And do I throw back to somebody else now, or do we just conclude there? Chris, do you come back on?
We can conclude there. Thank you so much.
Great. Look, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.